Do you believe there's any – you said you didn't believe there's a lot of teeth to the other options, but, I mean, I don't know if anyone can get in Kyrie's head. There's talk about a $6 million taxpayer mid-level exception with the Lakers and maybe rejoining LeBron. Would LeBron even welcome Kyrie back in that situation?
For $6 million, I'm sure LeBron would be happy to have that type of situation. I mean, really, if you want me to paint you a picture here, if Kyrie Irving was going to come up with a scenario that would maybe actually truly scare the Nets, he would opt out of his contract, which is, again, leaving $36 million he has guaranteed on the table, and he would be photographed arm in arm with LeBron in an LA restaurant on July 1st. That would be a way to truly scare the Nets that he would actually be willing to do that. And that might work. But that's a big risk on Kyrie's point. And look, he did leave $15 million on the table last year when he made his decision not to get vaccinated. So I can't sit here and say that he wouldn't leave $30 million on the table. But I'm not so sure that having lost $15 million last year makes it more likely that he's going to sacrifice that this year. But yes, Laker fans, I can't completely rule out the possibility that Kyrie would leave $30 million. I just don't think it makes sense.
Okay, so then crystal ball time. I think you've kind of answered this question. Opening day, October 18th. Is Kyrie Irving a Brooklyn Net? Your best guess.
I believe so, and he's on a contract he's not thrilled with, and the Nets are paying him on a deal they're not thrilled with, and that's what happens in negotiation.
The Brooklyn Nets.
Thank you.
Woj, if you don't have his alerts on, I don't know what you're doing, because he tweeted this earlier. ESPN sources, if Kyrie Irving can't reach an agreement to stay with Brooklyn, he has a list of teams he'd like them to consider on sign-in trades, including the Lakers, Clippers, Knicks, Heat, Mavs, and 76ers. None of those teams have cap space to sign him without the Nets' help. So, Bobby, I want to start with you. If you are one of those teams in the front office of one of those teams on Kyrie's list, are you considering bringing Kyrie a part of your team and working with the Nets in some way?
I wouldn't have any interest in Kyrie Irving, even at 1 year at $36.5 million. I look at those teams there, certainly from a sign-in trade, and we're not going to go into a whole math lesson on how the CBA works, but we could probably eliminate about 5 of those teams, Dallas, the Lakers, the Clippers, just based on where they are finances to exceed the hard cap. So we could probably eliminate Miami also here. So if I'm Brooklyn, I'm just saying, you know what? If you want to opt into your contract for next year at $36.5 million, feel free to do it. Or we're going to do a deal on our terms. But as we all know, the ultimate wild card in this is Kevin Durant, right? What happens with Kevin Durant if this Irving situation goes sour? But for me, I wouldn't have any interest if I was in that front office in one of those teams.
Well, I think it is tough because I think we're now starting to see some of the things that have transpired over the last few years. Now this fruit is starting to bear some fruit in the sense that, there's been issues, right? There's been injury issues, obviously having to sit out last year, some of the breaks, and there is no doubt about his talent. There is no doubt, and I want to compliment Kyrie in this moment right here. When he had to take all of that time off and still showed up, ready to play, ready to go to work, giving out 40 and 50 balls, not having played for months, that shows that he is working, that he is preparing. But I think some of the issue right now is, can he be counted on? If you're paying 40, 50 million, if you are a max player, I understand injuries, but you need to be counted on in so many other areas than just on the basketball court, and I think that's where people have questions.
Yeah, this is, to me, a negotiation. The reality is that the Brooklyn Nets are better off with Kyrie, with KD, the two guys that are friends, and then also hopefully getting Ben Simmons on the floor as well. And if you think about that trio, you have probably the best scorer in the NBA, that's 7-footer in KD. You've got Kyrie, one of the most clutch performers in the NBA, and then you've got one of the most versatile defenders in Ben Simmons. You want to give that a shot. Now, the question here is, all right, what is the likelihood that we get all three and everything's going to work? You don't feel good about it based on how the last 2 or 3 years have gone. But I do think this is a tango where Kyrie's going to try to get as much as he can by saying, hey, I want these suitors out here, and maybe someone will take the bait on me in order to get maybe a longer-term deal. But I do think it's in Brooklyn's interest to not let that happen the way that, he's...
Irving, who has until June 29th to opt in or decline his $36.5 million player option for next season. If he opts in, Irving would be eligible for an extension with the Nets or could play out the season and become a free agent in 2023. If Irving declines the option, he becomes a free agent this year, but would still be eligible to sign a max deal with the Nets if they're willing to offer it. Now, let's welcome in our senior ESPN NBA insider agent, Wojnarowski. So, Woj, you got a piece on ESPN.com about Kyrie Irving's looming contract decision. What is in the balance here for Kyrie Irving?
Well, I think for Kyrie Irving and the Nets is, of course, first of all, does he return to Brooklyn? Now, his options outside of the Nets, especially if the Nets are not willing or don't get engaged in sign and trade talks, are limited. There are not teams with cap space. Teams with space are perhaps not teams he would be interested in, and perhaps I don't think are interested in him. Now, the Lakers are considered the most significant threat right now for Kyrie Irving, but that would essentially entail him taking $30 million less than he can opt into in Brooklyn. There's a $6 million taxpayer exemption he could sign with the Lakers with. Now, most people would say a player's not going to give up that much money, but Kyrie Irving gave up nearly $17 million last year because of his refusal to get vaccinated. He lost a significant shoe deal with Nike, or is in the process of losing that shoe deal with Nike. So I think that the Nets have gone into this with their eyes open, that it's possible he could walk. He has done things differently in his career, but I think there's a sweet spot for the Nets and for Kyrie Irving to find a deal. And if they don't, how does that impact Kevin Durant's future with the Nets? All of that's at stake this week.
Yeah, and that's my follow-up here. Where does Kevin Durant lie in all of this?
And this is the real difficult position for Brooklyn because Kevin Durant remains very connected to Kyrie Irving. They came here together, and they are still together. Kevin Durant wants Kyrie Irving back. And what the Nets are risking, if Kyrie Irving does leave, does Kevin Durant then ask for a trade? Now, he just signed an extension last season. He's got 4 years left. It's difficult to ask for a trade with that much time left on your deal, and it's certainly difficult to dictate perhaps where you would like to go. The Nets want to avoid all of that. And certainly, I think Kyrie Irving's best leverage right now is the pressure that Kevin Durant is putting on the organization. And listen, there are other players. It has not been easy to keep role players in Brooklyn and to recruit role players in Brooklyn, especially with all the drama around Irving. And that impacts how they build the team too. But ultimately, Kevin Durant is the epicenter of this organization. And the Nets, in one hand, are trying to stay disciplined on an extension. They want to do a short-term deal with Kyrie Irving. He can opt into that $46 million, as you said, or he can opt out and get as much as $42 million in the first year of a new deal. But he wants a long-term max deal. That's not available to him right now in Brooklyn, nor is it available to him anywhere else. So, listen, there's going to be a lot of back and forth as the Nets, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant move forward. But no question, there's a great deal at stake. This was a grand experiment in Brooklyn, having Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and, of course, James Harden all together. And, what the Nets, of course, are trying to avoid is a scenario where Kyrie Irving leaves and then Kevin Durant says to them, I'd like